Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great show for you tonight. As you know, we are on the ballot. We are ballot measure 80. So I'm urging you to vote yes on ballot measure 80 here this evening, of course. We have several video clips. We have a variety of news channels here in the Portland area when we made the ballot back on the 13th of July. So we'll be showing those. We have a clip with Willie Nelson endorsing our initiative. We have a little bit of sad news. We've experienced the loss of famous hemp concrete manufacturer in Asheville. So we'll be talking about that. But first, we're going to bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves. Welcome back to the show. Hey, how you doing, Casper?
Fine, thank you. Nice to be here. It's quite an honor.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. We've made the ballot. We had quite a bit of news coverage. We've been preparing for the campaign. We're in the process of doing some polling and focus groups to test our messages and make sure we conduct the campaign in a professional manner. And so we're in the process of trying to generate advertising based on these poll numbers too.
Well, it's really exciting to be part of the history that's being made in this state, and I can only believe that the people living in this state will recognize the number of jobs that are going to be created by saying yes and making this happen.
You know, we've seen that there's been a recent editorial from our local newspaper here in Oregon, the Oregonian. They are traditionally a drug warrior advocate. They, in fact, are the only newspaper I know of that won an award from the Drug Enforcement Administration for opposing marijuana prohibition back in the 1980s.
Congratulations! No, really, you won an award.
And so they came out with the Sunday paper here this past week with two editorials. One of them saying that we're going to send the wrong message to children, of course, and they had a real concern about teaching accurate and scientific information to children in a drug education program. We set up a 1% of the proceeds from marijuana for a drug education program, and we outlined that it had to be accurate based on scientifically generated information. And the money's given to the school districts, so the school districts developed this program. And so the Oregonian was really worried somehow that marijuana growers would be giving them the information. And they took some things in our preamble, which is a legal findings by the people of the state of Oregon, and said that that's what we would be teaching children, which just isn't true. No. And in fact, they even took items out of that and inserted words in there that weren't in there. You know, they inserted marijuana into several contexts where it wasn't in the original language. So they were, it's like how they twist the politicians' words in their commercials. It sounds like they're saying something when when you see it in context, they're saying something entirely different. And so this is what they're doing to us, and of course it's a political campaign, and this is a drug warrior advocate. Then today, there was also a Society of Addiction Specialists Medicine a report that came out. It was an ex-drug czar, head of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, Robert DuPont. He and his group said they're trying to organize doctors to oppose our initiative in Oregon and the ones in Washington and Colorado. See, ours in Oregon is ballot measure 80. In Washington State, they have I-502, and in Colorado, they have Amendment 64.
I have to laugh at that because doctors are the ones who were first speaking up about the need for their patients to have access to this medication. Doctors were the ones who in the 1930s stood up and said originally, we don't need to be outlawing this. Our
The AMA actually went into Congress and opposed marijuana prohibition when it was first implemented.
So that's like asking the tobacco industry to come out and oppose tobacco.
Yeah.
I mean, because they don't want to see it. Doctors don't want to see this, and because there's a positive effect for their patients. There's a real need for it in their practice as dealing with all the needs that their patients have to come up against. And it's barking up the wrong tree. And the other thing that really I think is way off mark is that what we are teaching our children by legalizing by this plant for paper, fiber, fuel, and medications and ending prohibition is how important it is not to have silly laws against a plant, and how to take our natural resources and put them on things like school and education and libraries instead of incarceration, and how we're able to create great products like paper, fiber, fuel, and jobs, and an economy that will also sustain their lives and the lives of their next generation.
Well, the thing we're trying to focus in the Yes on Measure 80 campaign is jobs and justice, because we're going to create tens of thousands of new jobs in thousands of new businesses and dozens of new industries. And it's really an issue about jobs and justice and public safety. You know, right now, law enforcement is wasting limited public resources on arresting marijuana growers. You know, if you're in your home and there's a dangerous criminal trying to break into your home, you want the police to be available. You do not want the police to be arresting a marijuana grower about a mile away while you're facing a dangerous intruder. But we've seen a situation here that's really terrifying down in Oakland, California, about 2 months ago. 250 state, local, and federal law enforcement agents raided a thing called Oaksterdam University and the several coffee shops supplying medical marijuana patients and their owners. In one case, this paraplegic fellow, Richard Lee, who was the main sponsor of California's Prop 19 in 2010 that would have legalized marijuana, and got 48% of the vote. But while they were raiding these places just a mile away there in Oakland, a gunman went to a small college campus and killed 7 people and wounded a dozen more. So while all these police are tied up at the Oaksterdam medical marijuana raids on several locations, just a mile away, a gunman killed 7 people, wounded 12 more, walked around the campus, went into a purse, took some keys, then went and stole a car and drove away calmly in that car. And the police, in that 20-minute period, never got there because a mile away they were concentrating on a marijuana bust. That murderer went to a grocery store and turned himself into a grocery clerk. So the grocery clerk took custody of him, called the police came and arrested him at the grocery store. But that's just a graphic, terrifying, and horrible illustration of how the waste of resources on marijuana leads to tragedy. And that's what we're trying to stop. And so it really is an issue of public safety and giving. We're anticipating, according to a study from Jeffrey Myron, a Harvard economist, over $60 million a year in saved resources from the criminal justice system, mainly here in Oregon, from arresting marijuana growers and dealers. You know, possession of less than an ounce in Oregon, you just get a ticket, but you also lose your driving privileges. So we hope to completely do away with those laws.
And another tragedy we want to get rid of is the tragedy of poverty, and the tragedy of unemployment, and the tragedy of no future for our children. And we found out from watching what happened in Kentucky, when Kentucky went from being one of the most wealthy commonwealth in the colonies to when they outlawed marijuana, i.e. hemp, industrial hemp, to being one of the most impoverished and one of the most difficult states to get a job in and to grow in as a family man and as a family woman, to make a way for you and your children. And that is now happening in all of the states. Our state resources are being dried up. Many state municipalities are going broke and cannot afford the main functions of safety and traffic lights and making sure that their citizens have access to things like libraries, because they are arresting people. And if we had this plant legalized for paper, fiber, fuel, we would have jobs, we would have taxes that would be generated from those products that were being made, bought, and sold in this country, and we would have opportunities available to tomorrow's children.
That's right. It really is, as I was saying, an issue of jobs and justice. We have several film clips we're going to run now. This is from several local television stations back on July 13th when ballot measure 80 was first announced to qualify for the ballot. We'll be back in just a minute.
Happening now, Oregon is one step closer to possibly legalizing the cultivation and sale of marijuana. On Friday, the Secretary of State validated close to 89,000 signatures collected by supporters of the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act. That puts it up for a statewide vote in November. It will be Measure 80. If passed, hemp would be regulated and grown for food and fuel, while the sale and use of marijuana would be made legal for adults.
We limit the sales to adults. We establish a fine for public consumption, a fine for minors in possession, a misdemeanor for up to a year in jail, and $6,000 fine for gratuitously providing marijuana to a minor.
Oregon joins Washington and Colorado in voting on marijuana legalization this fall.
This November, Oregon voters will have the chance to decide whether the state should legalize marijuana or keep prohibition in place. KPTV's Kate Cagle is in the newsroom with what would happen if this law passed. Kate?
The Secretary of State's office certified the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act yesterday after confirming that organizers had enough signatures on their petition. In November, you will get to vote for or against Measure 80. Today, supporters got together in downtown Portland. The law would allow people to grow and buy pot. Like alcohol, you would have to be 21, and stores would need a state license to sell it. People could also grow marijuana for their own personal use.
Take it out of the hands of the criminal market and the cartels, out of the hands of the substance abusers and kids who are marketing it today and putting it in stores that are licensed and regulated, where the age limit's strictly enforced and substantial public revenue is raised.
The measure also allows farmers to grow hemp for fuel, clothing, and food. And then there's the tax. 90% of marijuana taxes would go to Oregon's general fund. Selling or having marijuana will still be illegal under federal law. The Office of National Drug Policy considers pot to be a controlled substance. The White House website says it has a, quote, high potential for abuse. So the main question come November is if voters vote for it, how will it be enforced? I reached out to the Portland Police Department how they would handle enforcement if the law passes. A spokesman told me they do not comment on political issues. I'm Kate Cagle, the 10 o'clock news.
Oregon voters now have a chance to make marijuana legal to everyone over 21. Late Friday, the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act got enough signatures to make the November ballot. News Channel 8's Wayne Haverly has been talking to people on this all this controversial issue, and he joins us live with more from both sides. Hi, Wayne.
Hey, Abby. Supporters say that the state's struggling general fund would get a massive boost by selling marijuana in state licensed stores. However, opponents say all that money is still not going to offset the health risks. Oregon just jumped to the front of the line in an effort to decriminalize and tax marijuana and hemp.
This is an industry that is already booming. It's already Oregon's biggest cash crop. $200 million a year is the estimate.
That number would likely go even higher if voters pass the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act. By selling marijuana at state-licensed stores, it's estimated more than $140 million a year would go to the state's general fund. And just like alcohol and gambling, 7% of the revenue would go to drug treatment programs.
The concept of additional revenues coming to help support treatment agencies is an interesting concept. The question will be, will it be enough?
Dr. Andy Mendenhall treats drug addicts and says European studies show a link between marijuana use and depression.
What's concerning is the fact that we know in young adults that marijuana does become a gateway drug.
Voters have strong opinions on the initiative.
I think that would not be a good thing.
Personally, I
I don't use it, but I think it's a great idea, and I think it's so easy to get it already. They might as well legalize it and make money off of it. It's good for everyone.
The legislation also legalizes hemp, a strain of cannabis already used by Oregon companies to make products like milk, clothing, even biofuels. But right now, hemp seeds can only be purchased from other countries.
It doesn't make fiscal sense to spend money fighting something when you could be making money regulating something.
Well, now Oregon joins Washington and Colorado. All three states have similar initiatives to legalize marijuana. And a recent Gallup poll, it really shows that attitudes on this issue seem to be changing. According to that poll, more than 50% of Americans now support legalizing marijuana. Abby?
Very interesting, Wayne. Thank you.
So that was the news coverage that we had when we made the ballot with ballot measure 80.
That was a fun day. I tell you, we got a lot of great people who came out to help make that an historic day. And Ray Crystal and the amazing team that worked to make the petitions come in the way they did on time need to be commended. Again, Paul, you have a group of wonderful people that have been working very diligently for this movement for a long, long time with you.
That's true, and we want to thank them and thank the patients that come to our clinic that enabled us to be able to pay all these petitioners to put this on the ballot. I really believe this is greatly going to help patients. The state raised the fee on medical marijuana permits from $100 to $200, and so this will make it where patients don't necessarily have to go get that. They could just grow their own without a permit. In fact, any adult over the age of 21 would be able to grow their own, and the sale of seeds and starts would also be legal. So you go to a local nursery and buy some starts of various varieties of cannabis, or seeds for that matter. And so it would regulate the sale of marijuana to adults. You need a license to grow it, a license to process it, and a license to sell it. And we anticipate that the sales, according again to the same Harvard economist Jeffrey Myron, would generate over $140 million a year. When you add that in with the over $60 million a year in savings, we're looking at $200 million a year. And that amounts to about 5% of the total state budget. So 90% of that would be dedicated to the general fund, so the legislature can use it. Most of that goes to education in the criminal justice system, but it'd be up to the legislature to allocate that. But of the remaining 10%, 7% would go to drug treatment programs so that alcoholics and addicts will get the help they need when they need it. Currently, they're turned away. If you have $10,000 a week, you might get into a drug treatment program, but otherwise, the beds are few and far between. So this would provide about $14 million in revenue, at least for drug treatment programs. And then it would also raise 1% for a drug education program that we talked about a little bit earlier, and 1% for each for two different new commissions, one on hemp biodiesel fuel to promote and develop hemp biodiesel fuel industries in the state, and the other percent to promote and develop hemp fiber and food industries in the state. So 2% would go back to what I believe is the original reason marijuana was prohibited, was to suppress hemp fuel and hemp fiber. And they made up the whole marijuana myth and taught us about what they called a deadly new drug, even though it's the oldest crop purposely grown by humans, at least 12,000 years ago. And so
well, this explains why, I don't interrupt, but the Senator Wyden introduced he went on the floor, an industrial hemp bill, because he recognized what you just said.
He tried to amend the Farm Act with an industrial hemp bill, but as breaking news, we can announce here that he's working with Vote Hemp to introduce a hemp bill that stands on its own in the United States Senate. And they've already got the other Oregon Senator Jeff Berkeley to sign on to that, and Rand Paul. And so they'll be announcing that sometime in the next few weeks, that Senator Ron Wyden is introducing a standalone hemp bill.
The two senators, and then the Attorney General is fed up with wasting resources and wants to see that the patients who need medical marijuana have easier access to it. And I understand that the mayor, the new mayor, should be coming into office.
Well, there's two people that are running in a runoff for the Portland mayor. One of them is Jefferson Smith, and the other one is Charlie Hale.
And one's pro-hemp, isn't
I think they're both pro-hemp.
So, and that makes sense because they understand the money that will be generated in
they're from Portland, after all. I mean, you know.
And they see the jobs that will be coming up, and they understand the need for saving the environment. A lot of people seem to recognize that this plant will help with a lot of environmental problems, too.
Well, in addition to being the oldest agricultural crop grown by people over 12,000 years ago, hemp does produce more fuel in the form of biodiesel from its seed, and ethanol from the biomass, because it makes more seed oil and more biomass than any other plant. And then it produces more protein per land area cultivated, which is the residue after they press the seed oil from the seed, and more fiber, about 30 tons of fiber per year per acre, for paper, building materials, canvas, rope, lace, and linen. In fact, back in 1916, the United States Department of Agriculture put out a bulletin 404, called Hemp Herds as a Paper Making Material. And in that bulletin they said that a waste product from making hemp bast fiber being the outer bark of the hemp stalk or stem, that waste product, the interior herd fiber, made more paper than trees by a factor of over 4 to 1. So the outer bast fiber is what's used to make canvas, rope, lace, and linen, where the outer bast fiber can also make high quality paper. In fact, most cigarettes here in the United States are rolled 50% in hemp, 50% in flax. So if you smoke tobacco cigarettes, you are actually 50% of the time when you're smoking that cigarette paper, smoking marijuana stem paper, because by law it has to be hemp or flax. And it's all pulped in a Spanish pulp mill and sent to 3 cigarette paper manufacturers here in the United States, Kimberly-Clark in New Jersey and a couple of others in North Carolina.
So it's a well-kept secret that the corporations don't want the secret out, because they recognize once the secret's out, then the average working mom and pop will be able to eventually have jobs that compete with those corporations.
You know, in Asheville, North Carolina, where I happened to go to high school and lived during my teenage years, they have built several homes out of a new but reintroduced concrete material made from quicklime and hemp fiber. And so these things are stronger than concrete. And the first person who started building those was in a partnership, and he just passed away. His name's David Madera. And so we have a 3-minute video we're going to run now about the construction of the first hemp house in Asheville, North Carolina.
Excellent.
Okay, I'm David Madera with Hemp Technologies. This is our first house in the United States. It's permitted. What you've just seen is the mixture. The mixture is the most important thing. That must remain consistent. As you can see from this wall, we're doing it in sections. Now these sections have to fit together, and that consistency of the mix is crucial. Now we did these on last week. We can take down the forms now and move them up. This is our big window here. We'll lay the bottom plate in it, and then this will be protected. So what we're using here is recycled plastic in reusable plastic shutter forms that lock together tight. Sometimes we have to screw them directly into the framing, but pretty much they'll unlock, and then we use them on the outside. Now this bottom layer, we need to leave that shuttering on for 24 hours. And after 24 hours, we can remove that first layer of shuttering system. And then we take the bottom shutters and we move them up on top. Now, in the perfect world, we'd have enough shutters to do both sides. But right now, we have to keep reusing them to go around the house. So with these forms, with regular concrete, you have a slumping that causes the bottom form to go out. With hempcrete, you do not have any of this slumping, so you don't have to worry about taking the form off too early. And with concrete, what would happen is pushing the form out. And that's why your forms have to be a lot stronger. And in this case, because we don't have any slump, we don't have to worry about that. Okay, so what we have here is the hemp shiv, or also called the hurd, which is the internal part of the stem of the plant. And that's mixed with a lime-based binder. And so with that lime-based binder and the hemp, we've got a negative carbon footprint. Now the difference between lime and concrete is that lime you don't have to heat up as much. Concrete you have to heat up to almost 3,000 degrees, which takes a lot of energy and does very poorly on the carbon footprint, whereas lime does much, much better. Now this binder, using the lime and the hempcrete together, you have a breathable wall, but yet air doesn't pass through, so you have a much more thermodynamic situation. Major differences between this and straw bale is when straw bale gets wet, it doesn't do as well as this. When this gets wet, it just dries itself out naturally because of its breathing capability. And so you never have mold, you never have dry rot, and you never have termites. And so this whole wall is going to breathe. So the cellulose properties of hemp are so much better than straw. Now there might be some plant out there that's even better, but we don't know about it. Basically what this does is, because of the lime-based binder, not only does it have a carbon negative footprint, it will pull carbon dioxide out of the air after the house is built, because the lime is trying to go back to being a rock, and it needs carbon dioxide to do that. That means this wall is going to get harder and harder and harder. Over time, it's going to petrify. So these walls will last for thousands of years, not at 40 years like what we're used to building.
All right, that was the hemp house being constructed, and we just this week lost Dave Madera, so our sympathies go out to his family, and thanks that he helped reintroduce that technology, making concrete out of lime.
Isn't that being made in other places in the world too?
It is, it is. In fact, you can go back to houses 4,000 or 5,000 years ago that were made out of it. So it's very common building material.
It's my understanding too that if you go to the...
And it's carbon negative. It reduces the amount of carbon out in the
I understand. If you go to a search engine and type in hemp house, you can find a complete home with the walls.
And that's
of
Dave Madera.
Everything made out of hemp.
Yeah, Dave Madera.
That's his
house. That's his house.
Excellent.
Well, you can build a house. I'd like to build a hemp house. I mean, wouldn't that be cool? And think if when I build a house at some point in the future, you can guarantee it will have hemp concrete and hemp fiberboard.
Well, that's what I thought was good. The walls.
I look forward
to the roof.
Yeah,
Even
the carpet.
The carpet, the furniture.
I brought back Chinese hemp carpets 25 years ago. Those were some of the first things I had
what
made
you
of
can do with this plant.
Yeah.
One plant can make all of that. Just mind-blowing.
That's true. And just think of all the jobs that could create in the fuel industry, in the food industry. We're already importing this stuff from Canada, and it's just going to become more and more popular, especially as it becomes less expensive. It's really the healthiest protein you can eat, according to this book about essential fatty acids like omegas 3, 6, and 9. It's called Fats That Heal and Fats That Kill by Dr. Erdo Erasmus, and it's a textbook in a lot of nutrition classes. It's Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill. It started out without a chapter on hemp, but back in the early 90s he put a chapter in called Hemp, Nature's Perfect Food. It talks about how marijuana seeds, hemp seeds, have the 8 amino acids and just the perfect balance needed for humans' health, in addition to all of the essential fatty acids in just the right balance. So this is the oldest agricultural crop. We started breeding it, at least 12,000 years ago, and the protein perfectly matches human nutritional needs, and the oil, essential fatty acid content does, and the flowers make the cannabinoids that mimic human neurotransmitters and are a powerful medicine. So to take the oldest crop that makes more fuel, more fiber, more food, and more medicine than any other plant on the planet, criminalize that is wrong, and we're trying to redress those wrongs and legalize hemp and marijuana. Because as long as marijuana is prohibited, it's the same plant that makes hemp. It's Cannabis sativa. It's the same as the difference between sweet corn and popcorn. So you can't have one and not allow the other. So as long as we have the marijuana prohibition, hemp cannot return to its rightful place in our economy. And it's the plant that makes more fuel, fiber, food, and medicine than any other. So to prohibit that plant has caused innumerable harms, but among them we're talking about deforestation that didn't have to happen, because back in 1916 the United States Department of Agriculture said that this waste product from hemp makes 4 times more paper than trees. Just think, if we had gone with that, how many forests would not have been felled in the intervening almost 100 years. Just think of how many toxic petroleum spills that we wouldn't have needed to have if we had had hemp fuel. And with the destruction of those forests and the pollution we have, if we don't restore hemp, the consequences will continue to be dire.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely.
So, we got the endorsement of an old friend of mine and yours, Mr. Willie Nelson. We both were involved with him over 20 years ago. And back in March, he endorsed Measure 80, the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act, with this commercial. So, Willie has a history here in Portland. He was a disc jockey for a local radio station, what's now KUPL, and he was a disc jockey for about 5 years. He also is an investor in the largest biodiesel company in America, Sequential Biodiesel, located over in Salem. Sequential Biodiesel makes biodiesel fuel from waste fat from fryers and fast food places, and also from other vegetable oil sources. So he's a big investor in that, and he's opened a chain of biodiesel fuel stations and truck stops. So Willie Nelson is an endorser of our initiative, and here's a little 30-second commercial he cut for us.
Hi, I'm Willie Nelson, and I urge you to support the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act to regulate marijuana and restore industrial hemp. This initiative will end adult marijuana prohibition and let our criminal justice officers focus limited resources on real criminals and not on marijuana users like me. OCTA will also allow farmers to grow hemp for fuel, fiber, and food, to create jobs and help our economy. Please support OCTA. Thank you.
So, Willie Nelson really concentrated there on the critical issues in our campaign. He concentrated on public safety and the waste of limited public resources to arrest marijuana users like us, and he talked about how hemp fuel, fiber, and food are going to create thousands of new jobs and help save family farms and return money to our communities. You know, right now when we burn the petroleum that's mostly imported from overseas, that money is going into the hands of the Saudi sheiks and the Nigerian despots and the other corrupt places that oil comes from, and it goes into their Swiss bank accounts and continues the centralization of economic control, where when we produce hemp fuel, we'll be giving that money to our farmers, and that money will be spent in our communities and revitalize our communities and create tens of thousands of new jobs. So it really is an issue of jobs and justice.
And governments around the world are waking up to this. Canada, as an example, our brothers and sisters along the borders of the United States, their government actually spends a lot of money to help promote the hemp industry that is there in their country. And if you have a hemp business, the government will give you X amount of dollars depending on your business to help advertise your hemp clothing or your hemp foods. And they want their farmers to be successful in the hemp industry. They recognize the good products that are being generated out of their industry, and they recognize
and our Oregon
the jobs.
Cannabis Tax Act will put 2%. We estimate that'll be about $3 million a year, perhaps more, into helping establish and develop Oregon hemp businesses, and half will go to biodiesel fuel, the other half will be split between promoting hemp fiber and hemp food.
And instead of importing all those great products now out of Canada, they can start exporting those products right out of Oregon to the rest of the United States. And the people in this state can be showing everybody else in America how important it is to end this prohibition.
And over 20 years ago, we were also working with Chris Conrad. I first met Chris when he was working on Jack Herer's book circa about 1989 or so, and he took a lot of quotes I had found from George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, some of them referred to in the preamble to the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act, and he included them in some of the early editions of Jack Herer's book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, I think like the 3rd or 4th edition, and he made it all to the last chapter of his first book, which was Hemp, Lifeline to the Future. But you interviewed him for your show back in 91.
And
he was Time for Hemp.
He was in charge of the Businessmen's Alliance for Commerce and Hemp.
BACH, B-A-C-H, Business Alliance for Commerce.
And it really made a lot of sense because he was talking about how introducing these products into the hemp economy would stimulate, as we've been talking about, jobs in across America, and how it would be economically viable to do it, to change the engines of her and to change industry of her.
He shows some hemp paper in there. That is actually my paper that I imported from China, so you'll see some of that. So here's an old clip from Casper's show circa 1991, about 21 years ago. Time for Hemp with Chris Conrad.
What we've got here, the first thing I should show you is this shirt. This is made of hemp with a blend with cotton. This is a 55% hemp, 45% cotton. It's
That's made of hemp, 55% hemp?
Correct. It lasts longer. It's 26% more water absorbent. It's more insulative, and it's much stronger than regular cotton would be.
Wow.
In the foreground here, I've got 3 pieces of paper. One of them, this is like a parchment style paper here. This is what your Declaration of Independence and Constitution were originally written on, a paper similar to quality as this. This is a filtration paper here, tea bags, things that you need to have stay strong when it's wet, because hemp fiber is strong. It doesn't lose that when it's in water. This in the middle is a, looks like a newsprint type of a paper. It's a pulp type of a paper. And
it's made of hemp, huh?
Correct.
Did they use this back in the early days? You know, like around Constitution time or something?
Yeah, well, they didn't use this. This is a pulp paper. They use more like this, the fiber paper that's...
And they wrote on it?
Manuscript paper.
Daily?
Correct. Right. Now, over here we have some seed. This is used as bird seed right now.
Yeah, get the birds high, right?
Yeah, it's called Happy Bird. Actually, birds sing better because when they use it, we don't know if it's, there's very little THC in there. It seems to be because it moistens their throat, because it has a lot of oil. In fact, it's 30% oil. And right next to it here we have some hair gel. This is made from hemp oil, and it's also got some herbs in it, some of the herbal hemp in it. Now, moving forward a little further, we see some other products that are made from the seed. When the seed is crushed, it produces oils and a high protein powder here, which is called seed cake. This is more nutritional than any other thing that we know of, excepting for soya. And in terms of digestibility, it's more digestible than soya. So it actually, when you look at parts of the world like northern Africa and Bangladesh and these areas where there's a lot massive starvation, a lot of that is a result of international laws that are preventing them from growing hemp for use as a food supply, which it has been for thousands of years for these countries.
No, really?
Yes, exactly. The law is the Single Convention Treaty of 1961 by the United Nations, and you notice that the big periods of starvation began in the mid-60s, late 60s, and continue on to today. Within 10 years of banning hemp, starvation became part of the norm for these parts of the world.
Wow.
Now, these two pieces of oil, samples of oil, this is a raw oil. You see it's got a little brownish color similar to the seed itself. This, on the other hand, has been distilled, and so it's cleaner looking. You can make anything from machine oil to cooking oil out of these.
Wow.
These are all fibers from the plant. This is a rather raw fiber. This is called a tow line. Both of these are from Russian hemp.
Russian hemp?
Right. Now, this string here and this rope, they're both from Hungarian hemp. This has been made into a bag here through a macrame process. They've wrapped it up. Here's a pot holder made out of it, your balls of twine, this tea bag back in here, and it swings us right back down to the plant from which all these products can be made.
Wow. Okay, now if you can make all these things, that sounds grand, right? But aren't you going to have a problem with like re-educating and retooling the market for people learning how to work with hemp and construct with it? I mean, we know that to loom with cotton, you use, different type, a little bit different type loom than you do with hemp. If you're going to have your car running around, running on methanol, right? Or is it methane?
Methanol.
Methanol.
Yeah. Methane would replace natural gas.
Okay, methanol. Then it means you got to turn the whole car over, turn the whole industry over, right?
Not really. One of the strong points about it is it's a big incentive because there's billions and trillions of dollars of profit that can be generated, and very little retooling is actually required. For example, the car needs a conversion unit, and then it can run on the methanol. But you wouldn't have to, for example, if you tried to make a hydrogen-powered car, you're talking about some major retooling. With a methanol-powered car, it's just a matter of one new part that needs to be put in to make it more workable.
Are there any other plants that can make all these things and can do all these things?
There are plants that can be used to do different parts of it, but as far as doing all of them, that's another matter. I wanted to get back to the other question about the retooling, though, because, for example, that's why they have the cotton blended in with the hemp here, because the looms are set up for a short fiber like cotton, and hemp has a long fiber, and so in order to make it work, all they did was blend it with the cotton, and they'll still get a lot of the benefits of the hemp, but without having to do the retooling that would otherwise have been required. You can make the oil, for example, is similar in quality to that made from jojoba plants. However, that's all you can make from jojoba, and it's a desert plant. It takes a long time to grow. Hemp grows copiously throughout the world. That's why we have these massive eradication programs, because it produces so much, and it can grow anywhere in the continental United States. Paper and fiber can be made out of things like canaf, or sugar cane can be used for making paper, for example, if you live in the tropics.
But what you're saying,
we don't live in the tropics.
What you're saying is there's only one plant that you know of that can do all of these things in all of the climates.
There's a lot of plants that can do one or the other of these things, but there's only one that can do it all and produce the amount of volume. If you want to go for fuel production, for example, that's going to take tons and tons of biomass. There's no plant that can do that on the continental United States excepting for hemp to produce a volume. Corn produces 1/10 as much.
So that was Chris Conrad and Mr. Casper Leach. Here you are today. Boy, we've changed since those days.
We have, and I know every time
goes on,
people see that clip, they think I must have been really dense about the topic of hemp. So just for the record, let me say it has been my job as a journalist to ask the easy questions that I might even know the answer to, but the people at home would like to have.
You were trying to
asked.
educate the audience.
Example like, Paul, how important it is for people to be registered to vote.
We can create lots and lots of jobs, but first to get there, like you said, we need to register people to vote. The 16th of October, that is the deadline to register. So we urge you to register to vote. Get your family and friends to register to vote. You always thought you didn't have anything to vote for. Well, now you do. If you're from out of state and you haven't registered to vote, go ahead and register to vote. Remember, if you've moved since you last registered to vote, you need to re-register with your new address, because in Oregon, you don't go out and vote. It's a lot easier than that. You get mailed a ballot, and so you have to mail that ballot back in. So we urge you to register to vote. Also in Oregon, as long as you're not in jail, even if you are a felon, you can register to vote. and you can vote. Even regardless of what anyone has told you, if you don't think you can vote, as long as you're a United States citizen and you are not in jail, you can get that ballot in the mail and mail it back in. And you know what? You don't have to vote for anything else if you don't want to. I don't vote on all those different judges and things I don't know. I only vote for the things I know I want to vote for. And I urge you to vote yes on Oregon's ballot measure 80 to legalize and regulate the sale of marijuana to adults, allow adults to grow their own without a license fee or registration, allow farmers to grow hemp for fuel, fiber, and food without a license fee or registration, and to regulate the sale of marijuana, to license that and license growers, processors, and stores and retailers to sell marijuana legally. And it'll be taxed and will raise lots and lots of revenue to help our government. So, you know, how many people want to be taxed? I want to be taxed. We want to quit facing the specter of marijuana arrests and the stigma of this prohibition that is obviously so wrong. You know, back when I tried marijuana, when I was 11 years old, it didn't stop me there. I was in Dallas, Texas, actually.
You were that young?
I was in Dallas, Texas, and the guy who smoked marijuana with me for the first time at a babysitter's house was back from Vietnam. This was 1972. And if he had been arrested for smoking marijuana with me at that point in time, he would have been put in jail longer than if he killed me. You know, there was a period of time where the death penalty was outlawed. They did not have a death penalty. So the average life sentence for killing someone, the average sentence for killing someone, you'd get arrested and you'd be out on parole in 7 to 10 years. Where in Texas, if he'd been arrested for smoking marijuana with a minor, he would have gotten 10 to 15 years in prison. So he would have actually gotten more time. So that didn't stop the use of marijuana. In fact, the only way really to stop it is to regulate it. And to, since we've regulated alcohol, the use of alcohol by minors has gone down every year since then. And the same thing will happen with marijuana. So we urge you to register to vote, get everyone you know to register to vote, and if you've moved, register to vote. That's really the key, to mobilize our community to register every person who'll be at least 18 years of age by November 6th, register them and get them to vote. And you know, here in the United States, there are hundreds of people in prison for life without the possibility of parole, who never harmed another person, who never stole anything. They simply grew marijuana. And they, in many cases, get life without the possibility of parole. There are hundreds of Americans in jail for life without the possibility of parole under federal law, just for growing marijuana with no weapons involved, no sales to minor, just based on the number of plants. And we've had people like Dr. Molly Fry and her attorney husband Dale Schaefer, who were complying with their state law, who are in prison for 5 years right now. And so you can go to Asia, and in Malaysia, if you have over a half pound, they will hang you. And so every year, dozens of people in Malaysia are hung for possession of small amounts of marijuana. But that doesn't stop people from getting marijuana either. I mean, you can go into a maximum security prison, and the prisoners will have a way to get marijuana. Mm-hmm. So we want to regulate the market. And then we could, I think it'd be better if the people in prison could have marijuana. You know, it would make it a lot more mellow scene in there. You know, it would, we'd have less violence. It'd give them an incentive. They'd be good, so they'd get the marijuana. You know, so. I would do it.
Another good thing, too, is that the people of the state have the opportunity to undo over 50 years, almost 70 years now, isn't it, of this horrible, horrible prohibition. They have the opportunity to take the paradigm of the entire planet and change it. And I'm not understating that in any way. By ending this prohibition and making it possible to reintroduce this plant back into our economy and begin to utilize it for all these products will absolutely make the entire future of the human race go into a completely different course of prosperity. It's totally amazing what this plant can do. And I'm not kidding, am I, Paul? You can actually make history.
It'll stop deforestation. It'll greatly reduce pollution. It'll create thousands of jobs. It'll redirect the wealth away from, because it's naturally decentralized. You know, if you're going to go out and drill for petroleum, and energy is the world's largest industry.
Yep.
I mean, the other thing, they build, you know, mine for uranium and build these incredibly expensive places that they don't know what to do with the waste anyway. That's another way they make energy. But with petroleum, they're drilling into the earth. That takes tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, or drilling into the sea floor when they have to go down miles deep in the sea. And they're taking up these carbon deposits. Then they're taking them to these refineries. They literally cost tens of billions of dollars. And then they're making that into fuels and plastics, and those things are incredibly toxic. And so we're going to reduce all that pollution. You know, one thing I've said on this show for years is if that Alaskan oil spill back in Prince William Sound had been hemp seed oil, it wouldn't have poisoned the environment.
No.
It would have enriched the environment eventually. It would have, the fish and the birds would have had food rather than something toxic and poisonous that killed them. So it really will change the whole environmental paradigm and the economic paradigm. It really is an issue of social and economic justice.
It is. So Paul's not kidding when he says, okay, so you might not want to vote for the Democrat or the Republican guy running for president. You might not want to vote for the person who's running for the Senate. But you need to get down there and vote yes to end the prohibition in this state on this plant and change our history and change the course of the human race. And someday we'll look back and say, thank you. 100 years from now, 200 years from now, thank you to the people in Oregon for saving the planet and for saving our economy.
So vote yes on ballot measure 80, and remember, it really is about jobs and justice. We have another film clip. We'll run that. Be back in just a moment.
I'll give you better photos. This is Mr. Henry Ford in 1941 with Popular Mechanics magazine showing off his car made from hemp.
Oh, is that when the whole car itself was made from hemp?
And it says so right there in Popular Mechanics, 1941. Is that nice? One more nail in the car. That's an I mean, they should have never let us find that one.
So that was a couple of our mentors, Jack Harrer and Gatewood Galbraith. Jack passed away about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and Gatewood passed just this past January. We miss them, but they were pioneers. And you want to tell the story about how
that was great?
Gatewood came across that?
Yeah, I was interviewing Gatewood Galbraith, my first time ever to have Gatewood as a guest. It was for the TV show, and Gatewood and I had just sat down and begun the interview. And Jack had been looking for a long time for evidence that verified that there was such a thing as a hemp car, a car made by Henry Ford out of hemp. But there was no, Jack couldn't find the evidence, the hardcore evidence. And he had been searching high and low, and Gatewood and I are having our interview, and Gatewood sitting down, and all of a sudden, out of the back room, Jack comes running out like you saw in there. He had just got that fax. Mm-hmm. And that was hemp history caught on tape. Jack Harris spent 4 or 5 years looking for that precise piece of paper, and that's when he came running out and said, look. And he found the proof of the hemp car made by Henry Ford.
Well, you know, Henry Ford was a pioneer building the hemp body and biodiesel fuel, and one of the reasons that we had marijuana prohibition and even alcohol prohibition to stop the ethanol market was because of the biofuel industry. So they did stop him in that regard, but you know, Henry Ford's company is still around today.
It was my understanding that Henry Ford had acres of hemp and acres of other, and he was actually using...
He had a lot of quotes that talked about how we shouldn't be using mineral resources and forests when we have the bountiful fields of hemp to make that.
And
so
he was
that was
stunned.
his belief.
He was stunned too, I think, when they went for fossil fuels and not went for the hemp fuel.
Right. Well, you know, they stopped him through the law and made certain he couldn't compete. That's what hemp prohibition was always about. Money, power, and the centralization of economic and political control. And our initiative, Measure 80, will take that out of the hands of the few and put it in the hands of the many, something that's naturally decentralized, doesn't take a lot of money to have a hemp seed oil press, doesn't take a lot of money to cut down a field of hemp and turn it into paper.
Yep, and
so
again,
our building materials.
They really have been making products out of this for a long, long time.
That's just the tip of the iceberg of what we can make with hemp. There's plastics, building materials, synthetic fibers, and you know, currently, even though hemp is prohibited and has these artificial economic barriers that make it much more expensive, hemp plastic's cheaper than petroleum plastic already. It's just we can't make very much of it.
This is what blows my mind completely. You've got some items right here that have been around 100 years or so, and we have, on the past several weeks, talked about other items like this. We have, if you Google hemp, medical hemp, industrial hemp, historical evidence that comes up, yet today's politicians and many of today's journalists for today's newspapers seem to find it impossible to find those truths.
That's true. That's true. So that's what this show is about, telling the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition. And so you've made it through another hour here with Cannabis Common Sense. We urge you again, you know, I started this show back in 1996 to promote our initiatives to legalize marijuana. And so we urge you to vote yes on ballot measure 80. And I know, Casper, you want to give a little plug for Time for Hemp?
I do. I want to give a plug out there for a show that I think is important, not because I'm the host of it, but because my guests are so amazing, and what they bring to the program is a wide variety of information pertaining to the need to end the prohibition on this plant. The show is called Time for Hemp, live, heard on AmericanFreedomRadio.com and on AM/FM stations all across America, 10 to 11 a.m. Pacific Standard, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard. You can also find our archives at timeforhemp.com. That's with the number 4. And if you go to iTunes and type Time for Hemp into the search engine, all 4 of our podcasts pop up, so you can download all of our podcasts into your MP3s, handhelds, and share them with all of your friends and make everybody aware that it is important to take time for hemp.
And to vote yes on ballot measure 80. If you want to find out more about that, go to OCTA 2012. That's OCTA 2012. And you can find the full text of the initiative. You can make a donation. Donations qualify for a tax credit. So if you make a donation, you can get a tax credit of up to $50 a person, $100 for married couples filing jointly. We certainly need your donations so we can advertise beyond this little television show and get commercials in the newspapers, on the billboards, and the radio, and direct mail. So please go to our website and help us make a donation, and you can get that tax credit. You can actually consider that $50 as a loan that the state of Oregon is going to pay back next year when you file your taxes. So that's the end of the show. Thanks for coming on, Casper.
It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for watching. Find out more about our initiative and help us restore hemp. Good night.